In this lecture, we'll look at exploratory data analysis, along with some important distributions, and then we'll look at Spark's MLlib machine learning library. In big data, there are two different kinds of statistics that are very important: descriptive and inferential. With descriptive statistics, an example is the median. Descriptive statistics describes the data, but we can't generalize beyond that. In this lecture, we'll look at exploratory data analysis, which is a form of descriptive statistics. Inferential statistics, examples are the t-test, enable inferences about populations beyond our data. These are techniques that we leverage for machine learning and prediction. Examples of the kinds of business questions we might want to ask include things like simple descriptive statistics. For example, who are the most profitable customers? Or hypothesis testing. Is there a difference in value to the company of these different customers? Or segmentation and classification. What are the common characteristics of these customers? And finally, prediction. Will this new customer become a profitable customer? And if so, how profitable? We can apply these techniques in different ways. Often, the kinds of questions that we ask when we ask business questions are very casual. What would happen if I show this ad? It's often easier to ask correlational questions such as, what happened in the past when I showed this ad? Now, there are two different forms of learning that are interesting for big data. There's supervised learning, which is classification and regression, and there's unsupervised learning, which is clustering and dimension reduction. Now, oftentimes we use unsupervised learning inside a larger supervised learning problem. So for example, autoencoders are used for image recognition neural networks. Now, here are some examples of the different learning techniques that we might try to apply. They fall, again, into the categories of supervised learning and unsupervised learning. Exploratory data analysis is based on insights that were developed at Bell Labs in the 1960s. They're techniques for visualizing and summarizing data. For example, what can the data tell us? Now, this is in contrast to confirmatory data analysis, where we already know what we're looking for, and we simply want to look at the data and understand whether or not it confirms what we expect to see. Exploratory data analysis introduced many basic techniques, including the 5-number summary, box plots, and stem and leaf diagrams, amongst other things. 5-number summary is a way of looking at the data in terms of its statistics, and includes looking at the extremes, the minimum and the maximum, the median and quartiles, and it's a technique that's much more robust to skewed and long-tailed distributions and looking at just simple statistics instead. This was summarized in a book that was published in 1977. So let's look at an example of a data set. And this data set is called Anscombe's Quartet. It was developed in 1973. We have 4 different data sets: set A, set B, set C, and set D. Now, the properties of each set are identical. In particular, the mean of X in all of the sets is 9. The sample variance of X is 11 in all of the data sets. The mean of Y is 7.5, and the sample variance of Y is 4.122. You can fit a line to all of these data sets using linear regression, and that line would be identical. Y equals 3 plus 0.5x. But what happens if we actually plot the data sets? Wow, we see that they're actually quite different. So the takeaway here is that it's very important to look at data graphically before you actually analyze it. And basic statistics properties will often fail to capture real-world complexities. Here's another example. This is a picture that was produced by Facebook by plotting the friendship relationships of individuals that are part of Facebook. And they did that using geotag information. This kind of data art is actually really quite fascinating. You can see the continents here, you can see countries, you can see cities, even though they did not actually use a world map when they plotted this. They merely plotted the geotag information. So this is an example of how visualizing the data sets can yield much more insights than simply just trying to look at the underlying numbers that are contained in the data set. The R language is an evolution of the S language that was developed at Bell Labs for exploratory data analysis. The idea is to allow interactive exploration and visualization of data, and it's the preferred language for statisticians and used by many data scientists. Its features include being the most comprehensive collection of statistical models and distributions, and also CRAN, which is a very large repository of open source statistical models. Now, let's talk about some definitions. The mean of a set of values is the average of the values, and the variance is a measure of the width of a distribution. The standard deviation is the square root of the variance, and a normal distribution is characterized by a mean and a variance. Here we have a figure that shows an example of a normal distribution. In probability theory, the central limit theorem states that the distribution of a sum or mean of n independent identically distributed random variables approaches a normal distribution as the number of variables approaches infinity. The common parametric statistical tests, for example t-test and ANOVA, assume that you have a normally distributed data set, but they also depend on the sample mean and variance. These types of tests work reasonably well for data that are not normally distributed as long as the samples are not too small. Many statistical tools, for example mean, variance, t-test, and ANOVA, assume the data is normally distributed, but very often this is not the case, so it's important to examine the histogram for your data set. On the left, we have a curve that is a normal distribution curve. In the middle, we have a histogram representing a positive skew in the data set, and on the right curve, we have an example of negative skew in a data set. Now, there are other distributions that are important that you will likely encounter in your work with big data. These include Poisson distributions. These are a distribution of the counts that occur at a certain rate. For example, the observed frequency of a given term in a corpus, or the number of visits to a website in a fixed time interval, or the number of website clicks in an hour. Another example of an important distribution is exponential, and this is the interval between two such events that you might see in a Poisson distribution. Zipf, Pareto, and Yule distributions govern the frequencies of different terms in a document or website visits. And binomial or multinomial distributions are a number of counts of events. For example, the number of 6 dies that show up when you toss them n times. It's very important to understand your data's distribution before you apply any model to that data. Joseph Rhine was a parapsychologist in the 1950s. He performed the following experiment. He had subjects guess whether 10 hidden cards were red or blue. He found that about 1 person in 1,000 had extrasensory perception. They could correctly guess the color of all 10 cards. Now, he called back these psychic subjects and had them repeat the test. They all failed. He concluded that the act of telling psychics that they have psychic abilities causes them to lose it. So what was wrong with his conclusion? While it is the case that correlation does not imply causation, that's not the problem here. The real problem is think about how many combinations there are of red and blue cards of length 10. There's 2 to the 10th power, or 1,024 combinations. So there's a 0.98 probability that at least one subject in 1,000 will guess correctly, which is exactly what he observed. And if you bring that subject back, it's extremely unlikely, very low probability, that they would be able to repeat that same observation. Spark provides MLlib, which is a scalable distributed machine learning library. It provides a scikit-learn-like machine learning toolkit and interoperates with NumPy. It provides functionality including classification, regression, and many other useful methods. In this course, in the lab, you'll be working on a problem of collaborative filtering. The goal here is to predict users' movie ratings based on past ratings of other movies. So the way to think about this is we have a set of users, those are columns here. We have a set of movies, which are rows here in this ratings matrix. We can model ratings as a product of user and movie feature matrices of size U by K for the user matrix and M by K for the movie feature matrix, where in this case K is the rank, and we want to learn K factors for each user and learn k-factors for each movie. Now we can do this by using the alternating least squares method. We start with random A and B vectors, and then we optimize the user vectors, those are the A vectors, based on the movies. We optimize the movie vectors, that's the B vector, based on the users. And we repeat this process until we reach convergence. You'll explore this in the lab. Now, if you're interested in learning more about Spark and machine learning, I encourage you to take the Scalable Machine Learning course, which starts June 22nd, 2015.